Hello, my name is Tammi Laninga. I'm a professor at Western Washington University in the Urban Planning program, and I'm excited to talk with you today about the Wild and Scenic Rivers and Private Property case study in Washington State. My co-presenter, who's not able to join us today, but who helped a lot with the project, is named Andrew Graminski, and he's a graduate of our program in urban planning and also earned the River Studies and Leadership Certificate in 2019. So I'm just going to share a little bit about the background of the just wild and scenic rivers in general, and talk a little bit about the focus of our project, looking at wild and scenic rivers and private property. And then I'll talk about wild and scenic rivers in the state of Washington. And I'll describe the methods that we used to get some information about this topic, what our findings are, have some recommendations, and then wrap up with a few concluding comments. So the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act was passed in 1968, which I'm sure many of you are aware of, and it celebrated its 50th anniversary just a couple years ago. The national system protects almost 14,000 miles of 226 rivers in 41 states and the Commonwealth of Puerto Rico. The majority of wild and scenic rivers flow through federally protected lands, such as the National Park Service or the U.S. Forest Service. However, in some locations, wild and scenic rivers flow past private lands, and herein lies the problem or the challenge. According to Norcross and Calvo, the Wild and Scenic Rivers Act has some limitations. In Section 12 of the Act, it lays out specific responsibilities for the land managing agencies for the protection of designated segments on federal lands. However, no specific corresponding guidance exists to manage or limit activities on private lands which border wild and scenic rivers. And so my interest was particularly piqued by this when Andrew was working as an intern with Skagit County, and he learned that there was a conflict between a private landowner and the county and the U.S. Forest Service with regard to some activities that that landowner wanted to do on property that bordered the Skagit River, which is a wild and scenic river. And so learning about this conflict kind of intrigued me, and as a planner I wanted to learn more and to understand there's a management plan for a wild and scenic river, and counties have comprehensive plans and zoning ordinances, and I wanted to see to the extent that there was consistency or even acknowledgement in those local plans about the fact that there's a wild and scenic river flowing through the county. So let's talk first about some ramifications of this concern with regard to the limited ability of federal agencies to say or have too much influence over what happens on private property. Regulatory environments are controlled by local governments in counties, not federal agencies. There are no requirements for local jurisdictions to inform private landowners of the wild and scenic river designation. As a result, there are uneven development and adverse impacts to wild and scenic river values on private property, and sometimes it can go as far as leading to lawsuits and litigation. So let's learn a little bit about wild and scenic rivers in the state of Washington. So Washington has 4 federally designated wild and scenic rivers with 8 designated rivers altogether. So the Skagit system is made up of 4 different rivers, and you can see it located here on the map. The majority of the Skagit system is in Skagit County, with a little bit of it in Snohomish. The middle fork of the Snoqualmie River is in King County, and the segments of the White Salmon River and the Klickitat River are here both in Skamania and Klickitat counties. And so except for the Snoqualmie River, which flows through public lands, U.S. Forest Service lands in particular, many of the segments in the Skagit system, as well as the White River and Klickitat rivers, flow through private property. And so again, we wanted to learn a little bit more about what's happening in terms of wild and scenic river protection and management, given this reality. So we conducted a case study. We did phone interviews with representatives from local government planning departments, Washington State Department of Ecology, and U.S. Forest Service personnel. And we reviewed literature and policy documents that really helped us identify best practices for how you might organize or operate within this context, and also looked at some case studies on managing wild and scenic rivers through private property. So let's get into our findings here. So first, for the Skagit River system, what we found is that there is very infrequent interaction between U.S. Forest Service personnel and county planners. Historically, there were a couple of people in both agencies who knew each other, and so they would communicate more frequently. But with higher turnover in the Forest Service in particular, those connections were lost. And to this day, there tends to be very little communication between the Forest Service and the county. There's limited private property owner awareness about wild and scenic river designations in the Skagit River system. There's no alignment between county level codes or policies with wild and scenic river management plans. We searched through comprehensive plans, zoning ordinances, and lots of other policies at the county level, and we found only one mention of wild and scenic rivers in their parks and open space plan, and it really only just mentioned the fact that there's a wild and scenic river, that the Skagit River is designated as wild and scenic rivers, but it didn't say anything about protecting its values or anything along those lines. So the lack of reference in local policies results in less consistent and comprehensive management of wild and scenic river values in the Skagit system. So looking at the white salmon and Klickitat wild and scenic rivers, that's a little bit different. The whole area of the Columbia Valley is designated as a national recreation area around the Columbia River. And so, and also a scenic area. So there is a lot of other kinds of protections or designations by federal agencies in the Columbia River corridor. So local planners are a little more aware of and understand the need to engage with federal agencies a little bit more on some of these other designations. The Forest Service as well in this area is quite active in educating and informing private landowners about what they can and can't do on their property that borders the wild and scenic river segments for the white salmon and the Klickitat rivers. However, it should be noted that there is, similarly to Skagit County, in either Skamania or Klickitat County, there is no mention of the wild and scenic river designations in county plans or codes, although the planners are more aware of some of these designations. So the challenge and the result really of some of this work is that there is a limited ability for the Forest Service to stop allowable but harmful projects that are bordering private property in these counties. So let's look at some recommendations that we identified through some of the literature reviews that we did. One of the most direct ways of informing private property owners to whether or not property that, if they have river border, property that borders a river, for them to know whether or not it's designated, is when they may go in and want to do some kind of activity on their property that requires a permit. And so one suggestion that we have is that counties could add a wild and scenic rivers checkbox to their development applications. And as a result, then it would, if someone is coming in and wanting to do something on property that borders a river, they would have to go and at least identify whether or not that river or that segment of river is designated as wild and scenic. So it's a form of education and information, and also just to get a sense of like what's the status of this. The other piece is that we are encouraging counties to add goals to their comprehensive plans that align with the Wild and Scenic River Management Plan. In Washington State, all counties are required to prepare comprehensive plans, and they have sections or chapters on the environment. It would be a very logical location in which they could incorporate information and policies related to protecting Wild and Scenic River goals. And it really is in everyone's interest to protect those values because for ecological purposes, of course, but also for the economic implications of having this wild and scenic river, and that it draws tourists and visitors and supports recreation. So another recommendation that we have is regular communication. So regular meetings, whether they're set up quarterly or even just once or twice a year, between local and federal agency counterparts, and maybe the state as well, especially if there is Department of Natural Resource lands in that corridor. Just to check in and to see what's going on and to keep that communication open, and for the federal agencies to learn, where are those development pressures, what are activities that people are requesting or wanting to do along rivers, what are ways that counties can help inform and protect those areas. And then finally, and this is where Andrew and I, when we were doing our research, ran across as these partnership river programs that really are found primarily on the East Coast. We came across the Farmington Wild and Scenic River program, and there are 16 other rivers as well in the Eastern United States that are part of this partnership river program with the National Parks System. And these are rivers that flow past primarily, if not completely, all private property. So the benefits we found in these partnership river programs is that participating stakeholders are coordinating economic development activities and recreational opportunities. They are working coordinated to identify river values that are important for protection. They are working to protect the river in the long term through coordinated policies and regulations, and making sure that there's consistency with those federal management plans. And that was the piece that really piqued my interest again in understanding that importance of having consistency across plans. And then also these partnership programs support frequent public engagement opportunities with people who are both using the river for recreation purposes, but also those who own the river, or I'm sorry, who own property that touches that wild and scenic river. So just to wrap up and conclude this case study on private property in Washington, wild and scenic rivers, once designated, wild and scenic rivers need continued protection and enhancement. We all know that. And that protection and management really requires coordination and consistency between local and federal government planning documents, regular public outreach and engagement, both with the general public as well as landowners, and the possibility of creating these collaborative partnerships between various stakeholders to ensure that these rivers that have been designated continue to be protected to the extent that they need to be. And that's what we have to share with you today. And I'm very curious to learn and to know from other people's experiences how this works where you live. And have you had experiences or seen that there have been conflicts or challenges related to public federal agencies and local governments, private landowners? So I hope we might have time to chat about that in the discussion part of this session. Thank you very much.